Here.
Terry McCrann. Hi, Terry.
Great to be with you, Rita.
We've got to talk Trump first. I know we've got a lot to talk about. You've had a couple of sensational pieces this week, but it's been quite a victory lap for him, and he was not...
And a victory lap he was fully entitled to take. I mean, the absolute point about all this, Rita, is... And the media completely glosses over it, of course, obviously the Australian media, but also the US media, because they're at the centre of the firestorm. The way they have trashed Trump, attacked him, and not just attacked him in the normal sort of political framework, but accusing him of being a Russian traitor for 3 years. And not only, and the Democrats have been part of that, a big part of that, obviously, and claiming they've got the evidence that he's a Russian traitor. You know, Schiff was coming out with this garbage every day saying,
he's got proof.
He's got evidence. We've got the proof, and you know Mueller is going to expose it. And there isn't a scintilla of proof of anything to do. You know, yes, Trump was trying to destabilise the 2016 election campaign.
Russia was trying to.
Russia. Big, you know, big surprise. You know,
they do that with every election, by the way.
Exactly. and after all this abuse, unrelenting for 3 years, and then they come up with this phony impeachment process at the end of it all. You know, and Trump is entitled. Anybody would be entitled to be, to use an Australian phrase, pissed off at what's been done to them.
Well, he was a little bit peed off today, but he was also jubilant. Let's have just a quick look at what Trump had to say earlier today.
So, you could take that home, honey. Maybe we'll frame it. It's the only good headline I've ever had in the Washington Post. We've been going through this now for over 3 years. It was evil, it was corrupt, it was dirty cops, it was leakers and liars. This is a political thing, and every time I'd say, this is unfair, let's go to court, they say, sir, you can't go to court, this is politics. And we were treated unbelievably unfairly, and you have to understand, we first went through Russia. It was all bull.
He's right. It was all BS, and the attacks against him. I've never seen anything like that against a politician in the West.
And he fought back. And that's, you know, both as you saw there personally, and obviously the process played out. You know, why is it partisan for the Republicans to look at the non-evidence and acquit him, but it's not partisan, you know, in the media's framework for the Democrats to engage in this complete and utter beat-up in impeaching him in the first place.
But I mean, they said they were going to impeach him as soon as he was elected.
Exactly.
And this plot has been in play from day one.
He committed an impeachable offence. He won. Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. If they were honest about it, I could be more respectful about why they were pursuing it. But obviously that response from Trump has upset all the usual suspects, The Guardian, CNN, MSNBC. They've lost their minds over his tone in that clip we've played for you. So let's hear from CNN's White House correspondent, John Harwood.
Look, this was a very disturbing tableau for the country. It was dark because he's made clear that his mind is dark. This is somebody in deep psychological distress right now, self-pitying, insecure, angry.
That's extraordinary.
That's a fair bit of projection, I would have thought there. He's dark. His mind is dark. Did he seem to you like he was a deeply troubled soul needing psychiatric care from the clip we just watched?
I think he's projected quite serenity and calm anger at what had been happening.
Well, Nancy Pelosi, obviously, she has been under the spotlight this week as well, not just with the impeachment, but
she doesn't come up well under the spotlight.
She doesn't. She has been a bit more coherent today, thankfully, but the act of ripping up the speech.
And pre-ripping it so that she could...
Yes, she got caught out, so there's footage of her under the table just ripping it to make sure that she could rip the paper a little bit and then standing up and doing it. And of course, it was a stunt. It was designed to pander to that demographic who loved that sort of thing. But I would argue it's backfired because that State of the Union address was very well received and there was a lot of great Americans there who were honoured. And when you rip up a speech that mentions them, you're almost belittling what they did.
Particularly some of the minority groups that Trump celebrated and drew out, the 100-year-old black airman, the minority child that's getting a scholarship and all that. And you've got Nancy Pelosi effectively saying, pouring, rubbish on those people. And I think that will backfire big time because those interest groups, those minorities are fundamental to the Democrat base. And if Trump, and as he did in the 2016 election, gained significant support in 2016 amongst the Hispanic Americans, in 2020, the black Americans, good night to the Democrats.
I mean, if he can attract even anything approaching the percentage of Hispanic voters from the black community, that is done and dusted. But those voters are typically very much rusted on. But as we know, the unemployment rate for black Americans is at an all-time low. What is your opinion of this entire circus? It's done, it's finished for now. Will it tarnish Trump's presidency? When we look back on the history books, there will be a cross there that he was impeached?
Well, Senator Schumer was saying there's now an asterisk because he's been acquitted inappropriately. No, the asterisk is about the insanity, the disgrace of the Democrats in going through this process. That's the insanity. The way they've completely trashed their own responsibility to the public, to America, in the way they've tried to bring down a fundamental tenet of the whole constitutional structure in America. I think, Rita, now we move on into reality, and the reality is the US economy and the US stock market. Now, I think that's the biggest thing that Trump has going for him, because he's actually delivered to everybody in America. The idea that it's only the rich that have benefited from the Trump presidency is an absolute rubbish.
No, the wages growth is most significant in the lower categories.
I mean, first you get the job, and then you get a good wage. So the two things have built on each other. But it's also the biggest risk, obviously, because the election's 9 months away. So, in the world in which we now live, we see with the coronavirus that things can come out of left field that can be extremely damaging to the economy. So if the economy and the stock market, which is important, obviously, and I think Australians will understand it through their superannuation, how important that is to your feeling of wealth and well-being, if they hold up, there's no way that Trump can lose the election before you even get to the hopelessness of whoever's going to be up against him. But obviously that's the big factor. If the economy was to go over a cliff, well, then it's a different story.
Absolutely. Now, one of the impacts of the impeachment process, which obviously the Democrats didn't intend, was that they have badly damaged their front-runner, was their former front-runner, Joe Biden. Some of the polling, and I know Trump's support in polls is always understated, so you've got to take it with a grain of salt. But back in September, Biden, in head-to-head races, was leading by 16 points. He was well ahead of all the other Democratic candidates. And now we know about what was happening whilst he was vice president. He's been put under the spotlight and he's been found wanting.
Well, more than wanting. I mean, he's in a sense been under the spotlight in a narrow focus for the last 40 years because he's been a prominent member in Washington. But 80% of the American public don't watch that like we do and our peers in America do. So I think that Biden was always going to come under pressure once he was in living rooms.
He was always going to falter, but he's now in danger of falling away.
Well, he's clearly not going to be the candidate now. I mean, it's Sanders or Buttigieg. Buttigieg, is that the way you pronounce it? It'll be Sanders or Buttigieg. You
don't see Elizabeth Warren as she's the media's favourite?
Not really. I think she's a pale, if I can use that word, pale version of Sanders. So I don't really see her as... I mean, it's either Sanders or Warren.
You don't think Sanders is too extreme? This is a guy who's essentially a communist or at least a socialist, and he's been in
Rita, amongst normal people, yes. But remember, you're talking about the Democrat Party, which has gone completely insane.
You don't think as we get closer, they are going to, sanity is going to prevail, and they're going to say, if we've got any chance of beating this man, we need to put up a candidate that's palatable to the American public?
Did you catch up with the comments of James Carville, Democrat strategist?
Yes.
A long-time who was almost panic-stricken on television. This is a guy that's been in the Democrat Party, and he was instrumental in electing Bill Clinton in '92, and he was actually saying, I'm panicking when I see what we're likely to end up as a candidate.
Well, I tell you, I thought Nancy Pelosi was a little bit wiser than she's shown herself to be again this week, but she has been unapologetic about her antics and tearing up the State of the Union address, and she even went on a rather bizarre attack of her own today. Have a look.
It's just, I have tried to be gracious with him. I'm always dignified. I thought that was a very dignified act compared to my exuberance, as I said. Quite frankly, when he started talking about someone with stage 4 cancer, all of that, I thought he was, I don't know which stage John Lewis's cancer is at, but when he started talking about someone with cancer, we thought he was going to talk about John Lewis, a hero in our country. Come on. So in any event, I feel very liberated. I feel very liberated.
She feels liberated, but she even went on to suggest that perhaps the president was medicated or sedated.
So again, I extended the hand of friendship to him, to welcome him as the President of the United States to the People's House. It was also an act of kindness because he looked to me like he was a little sedated.
Oh, we replayed that clip, but trust me, she said that she thought the president looked sedated, which was a fairly interesting thing for Nancy Pelosi, of all people, to say. Again, I'm surprised she's not smarter than this, because she has been a very smart politician throughout her career, and surely she would see that to appeal to that mainstream voter, those swinging voters who were willing to vote for Obama, but they switched to Trump, to get them back, that these antics aren't helping.
Well, we're told, Rita, that she was vehemently opposed to going down this impeachment path. She realised that it was going to be it could be a complete disaster, and she stuck with the outcome, and she stuck with, in a sense, having to defend it. So I think that she's flaying around. I mean, at the very least, she doesn't know how to handle the post-impeachment debacle that they've now ended up with.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Pelosi also said today that the State of the Union address was beneath the dignity of the White House. So let's have a look at a couple of bits and judge for ourselves. Let's have a look.
The unemployment rate is the lowest in over half a century. And very incredibly, the average unemployment rate under my administration is lower than any administration in the history of our country.
Terry, the New York fact checkers had to fact check those details, and I know it pained them to come back and say, yeah, that was actually accurate. But that's true, and that's probably why he is in the box seat now. But the speech also had emotional moments where the president paid tribute to great Americans.
Sergeant Hake now rests in eternal glory in Arlington, and his wife Kelly is in the gallery tonight, joined by their son, who is now a 13-year-old and doing very, very well. To Kelly and Gage, Chris will live in our hearts forever. He is looking down on you now. Thank you.
And that's why it was stupid to tear up that piece of paper, because in effect you're disrespecting all those great
Absolutely.
Americans.
I mean, some of those things might be a bit sugary for an Australian audience, but they are very important in the American context. I mean, they take these things very much more seriously than we do with our sort of laid-back attitude to patriotism. So to attack the patriots in America, as Nancy Pelosi did, was really a very, very silly thing to do.
Oh, absolutely. Now, just coming closer to home, you wrote a very interesting piece this week about the decision to spend 80 billion now on French submarines. I thought it was 50 billion. It keeps going up every time I hear this story. You said it was the single most stupid decision any Prime Minister's ever made, and it elevates Malcolm Turnbull to the status of Australia's worst ever Prime Minister. Do you stand by that? Because we've got some shocking Prime Ministers in our history.
I was very reluctant. I was very reluctant to snatch my gold medal back from Kevin Rudd.
Oh, yes.
Previously, he's been unquestionably on that podium as Australia's worst Prime Minister. And interestingly, I don't think too many people in the Labor Party would disagree with my characterisation. And certainly a certain subsequent and former Prime Minister, Julia somebody, anyway.
But I think we remember her more kindly because she has conducted herself with such grace.
Absolutely, absolutely.
After
I was saying that she might agree with me as well.
Her reign was terrible, obviously.
But, you know, when you think about the submarine decision, it's utterly bizarre. It's actually, you know, and it's actually gone through a process, supposedly in Canberra, where experts in the Defence Department, experts in government, experts in Treasury, sat down around tables and, you know, yes, Prime Minister, this sounds like...
But how? How does that happen? How do we go down a path where we get an inferior product at an inflated cost, something that may be obsolete by the time it's actually delivered?
We are demanding that it be made obsolete now. I mean, the example I quoted, Rita, in my column was that it's like somebody buying a warship before the First World War in 1914, which is only going to arrive in 1935, the first one in 1935, before the Second World War, the last one well into the 1950s, and you say, let's take the state-of-the-art warship in 1914, and we want you to uninvent it and take it back to what was the warship we had in the 19th century. And they're going to be coming in, you know, 20 to 30 years' time. It's just blows your brains out.
It is. And is there any way
and spend that sort of money on it?
Well, that's it. 50 billion wasn't appalling enough, but now we're hearing figures of 80, 90, 100 billion this project is blowing up. Is there any way to pull back,
Absolutely.
to cut the loss?
You know, whatever it costs, even if it costs $10 billion, which it wouldn't, to abandon it, we have to abandon it. I mean,
if we've signed a contract, are we not obliged to
give you another example, which is sort of stuck under the radar. We are getting these submarines, and we're going to denuclearise them, so they've got to go back to diesel technology. Yeah. The US government has just ordered 9 new attack submarines, exactly the sort of submarines that we're getting, at a cost of $22 billion US, which is about $30 billion Australian, at least half the price that we're paying. And the last of those submarines will be delivered to the US Navy in 2030. We will still be waiting for our first submarine, and the US Navy will have 9 more submarines.
Oh, goodness me. Now, you also wrote about the national parties.
So do you agree with me? That
I've agreed with you from the start. I think this is one of the most disgraceful decisions.
No, about a certain former Prime Minister.
Being the worst ever.
It makes you believe in ghosts, doesn't it?
Look, you know what?
Very miserable ghosts.
I think I was there already because, you know, I've got no love for Malcolm Turnbull. And I think whatever legacy he had, whatever positive vibes or memories people have has been completely trashed by his conduct.
But at least he spawned a pillar of logic and rationality in his son.
Alex, well, that's interesting too. We should talk about Alex later in the show because he bragged about the 6-figure donation that he was making during the election campaign, but apparently that's not what happened. Look, I'm going to just quickly ask you about the National Party. They've obviously had their vote. McCormack's being restored. Is that the end of it? Are we going to have some stability now, or is this just the beginning of another leadership challenge?
Very quickly, Rita, we've seen this movie played so many times before. You've got a nice guy, Michael McCormack, but he's an absolute dud as a political leader. And he's challenged by an aggressive challenger, Barnaby. The challenger loses first time around. Anybody mentioned Paul Keating back in 1989? Is not in, and you know, Kevin Rudd again with Julia. He's going to come back. I mean, the two great political talents, people mightn't like Barnaby. Some of the things he says are a bit kooky, but the two great political talents in the National Party, which is important not just generally in politics, but in terms of how they don't get steamrolled by their partners, the coalition partner. Barnaby Joyce and Matt Canavan. And the National Party is saying we don't want them on our team, which is just stupidity of a degree, again, which, you know, is hard to explain.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry McCrann, for joining us today. I'll be back after the break with more.